people who actually make motorsport work. So who are we? I'm Brian Hemmings. I'm a member of the Anglia Motor Sport Club and West Suffolk Motor Club, work on their committees. I'm also Motorsport UK steward, a Motorsport UK trainer, and one or two other things in the region of East Anglia. I'm joined today by
myself, Brian. So evening, everyone. My name's Sam Walker. I'm from Motorsport UK. I've been part of the organisation now for about 11 months. It's coming up to a year almost. But outside of my work with Motorsport UK, I'm very much involved in sprinting and hill climbing. That's my true love really in motorsport. So I was the Chief Marshal at Lowton Park for about 5 years from the age of 18. On top of that, I was also the coordinator of their championship as well, with about 70 competitors. I'm currently undergoing my speed clerk training as well. So my main activities this year are actually out clerking events across the country, particularly hill climbings. I'm also an event organizer with the club, but also with other clubs as well that mainly organize sprints. And then, like Brian, I'm also a Motorsport UK trainer. So yeah, thanks, Brian, for having me tonight.
Thanks for being with us. Also on the call, we've actually got a few others of our, or should we call them, club members who actually know what's going on, if that's a way of expressing it. And they will obviously chip in at the Q&A session at the end if there's any questions, and I'm sure we'll be able to answer them when we get there. So what's tonight all about? As I said earlier, it's part of the Get Into Motorsport initiative that Anglia Motorsport is actually running. And what we're going to try and do tonight is provide an introduction into all those opportunities that exist for people to get engaged with motorsport. Or maybe if you're already engaged to a certain extent, how you can widen those and other things you can actually get involved in. There's no end to the actual context of all the aspects you can actually join in with. And what we're going to try and do is spell out what those are. We're going to spend more time talking about the roles and what they are to try and sort of explain the potential and the possibilities. And then right at the end, we can go into the how you can take a next step in making those steps move forward. So next slide.
So before we sort of get into the real tough stuff, as it were, with the roles itself, I think it's worthwhile just giving you an introduction to motorsport as a whole. So the term motorsport is actually very broad in terms of what it covers. Now, Motorsport UK itself cover 13 disciplines. And this ranges all the way from your Autosolos, which is happening in Tesco's car park, right the way up to the Formula One British Grand Prix at Silverstone and World Endurance Championships and things like that. So as I said, we've got rallying, auto tests, trials, my love of hill climbing and sprinting. There's a vast variety of events which are happening all across the country. I think one thing that surprises people is actually the way they're all organized is the same everywhere, in terms of there is a club which is mainly responsible for putting that event together, but they can be national status, it could be a clubman status, it could be an international status meeting, but there is a central club which organizes that meeting with a core team of people. Now, as part of that, and this is where Motorsport UK comes in, we are the governing body for the sport. So what we do is have the jurisdiction of the sport as a whole in terms of the governance and the judicial side of and safety side of things. But actually it's the club level and that sort of those organising teams which are the first point of contact really for most people wanting to get that first step into motorsport. They are the ones that you can approach. But what Motorsport UK can provide is that source of information. And this is partly why I'm here tonight, but there's also resources we'll talk about later on as how you can both use the clubs and Motorsport UK to your advantage to get the most out of the sport in a volunteering aspect. Just so you're aware, if you aren't already, the sport is governed by what is called the yearbook, commonly known as the Blue Book. And it's within this rather large 500-page book, which all the regulations for the sport are printed. And this is basically the go-to for every official, every organising club, anyone wanting to run some kind of motorsport event will comply to the regulations that are in here. It may seem daunting at first to open it up and think, oh my goodness, you know, what does all of this mean? But actually it's broken up into fairly logical sections. So you have your initial sections for your organisers and your clubs. You have sections around safety. There's sections around the vehicles, so how they're compliant with the events, the safety regulations that they have to meet. But then what you also have are your discipline sections. So within the Blue Book, there are sections for trials, rallying, speed, circuit racing, karting, All of the 13 different disciplines I briefly mentioned earlier have their own little section in there. So really, if you're focusing your club on rallying, the only section you need as the organizer is section R, for instance, which is the rallying, which are the regulations which are important for you if you're out there organizing these kind of events.
Thanks, Sam. So we're now going to start to give some thought to kind of ways that you can actually engage and get involved in motorsport. I guess competing is the one that most people think of first, because that's the kind of what you go and do first, isn't it? I think the reality is that most people do not start competing. They start by going along in some way, getting involved, even if it's only spectating. And that gives them an insight into what the sport's all about. So that's what I'll concentrate on tonight, which is the volunteering side, the non-competing side. And there's a whole host of ways you can get involved in this. I think sitting behind it is the fact that in getting involved in any of these ways does give the opportunity to learn about all the different types of sport, all the different disciplines, all the different ways you can get involved, and then decide which you like the looks of, which might be an interest. So it gives you that really good background for growing in the sport if you wish to, or diversifying in the sport if you wish to. So that's kind of a background. So next slide, please. So when we get into these roles, there's some strange names, or at least I always thought they were strange names. So it brought to mind kind of where do many motorsport terms actually come from? And the answer is horse racing. So if you think about things like the paddock, it's where all the cars go, but it's also where all the horses go. We have terms like clerk of the course and stewards. So if you are familiar with horse racing, try and make the connection with the roles in horse racing, because it's going to be very similar. The difference being, of course, the vehicles are somewhat different, and the speeds of travel at are a little bit different on occasions. Okay, so next slide, please. So what are the opportunities that are actually available? The obvious one is marshalling. Now, when I say obvious, that's because it's probably one that gets most visibility and gets talked about a lot. We're not going to talk about that tonight because there's a separate session, another of these Take Part Tuesday sessions in a week's time that's going to concentrate on marshalling. So we're not going to cover that at this point. Instead, we're going to cover the rest. So those are officials, the people that make the actual events run. The main topics there, or the main roles there, the clerk of the course, the secretary of the meeting, the timekeeper, which is a marshalling role. So we're not going to concentrate on that. That will come in the marshalling session as well as, and the stewards. Next area. There's a technical piece to it. The people that make sure the vehicles are what they should be and check eligibility, etc. We'll cover that as well. And the last one is the sport. Those people that actually make the actual events run by providing recovery services or rescue services. And those are the primary areas that actually make the events run. As well as that, there are a whole host of roles just making the actual clubs work, the administrative stuff. And we'll spend a few minutes on that. So what we're going to do is take each of those sections and take a look in a little bit more detail at each of those. So let's start with the officials.
So with some officials, and it totally depends on what kind of event is running. And as I said before, you have your various permit levels. You can have your Clubman's event, your Tesco car park Autosolo, right the way up to an international event happening at Donington or Silverstone. So what that means for us as terms of Motorsport UK is some of these roles are licensed, but that's nothing to put you off. This is actually a way of recognizing the development and the learning that you have achieved in these roles to bring you up to a level where you can go out and progress, and you can go and clerk, or you can steward, or you can scrutineer at higher status events. All of the roles that we're going to mention tonight, or the vast majority of them, have what we call a development pathway. And we'll talk more about how that's facilitated with a logbook, and that's in a later slide. But it's a very clear structure for anyone wanting to get involved to know what things they have to learn, what experience they need before they can then achieve a higher status license. But as I said, if you're running an Autosolo or your Clubman's levels events, the vast majority of these roles actually don't need a license. And it's a really, really good way, particularly if you're wanting to get into some of these roles, to go and do your Clubman status events because you actually don't need a license. It's a brilliant way of putting your toe in the water, testing the temperature, and seeing whether it's for you or not without having to fully commit yourself to training and development pathway. So first of all, we're going to talk about the on-event roles. And as we said, there's the split between the club roles and the on-event roles. And Brian's just going to briefly talk you through the three main ones we're going to talk about tonight.
Yep. Thanks, Sam. I just reiterate and echo Sam's comments about the licensed officials are the people that actually operate at the high levels, etc. But there are opportunities at all levels of the sport to undertake any of these roles. And many of the events that the local clubs will put on will not need licensed officials because they're kind of smaller local events. And as Sam said, they're great opportunities to learn what it's all about and dip your toe in the water, so to speak. So let's talk as Sam said, about the officials on the event. The three principal ones are the clerk of the course in the centre of things and the secretary and the steward at either side of this diagram. In reality, next slide, they work very much as a team, and those three actually make the event work. There are many others that actually contribute and all are indispensable to making the event run, but this is perhaps the core of the actual event. The clerk of the course's role is the operational one. It's the role that makes things happen. The secretary is the administrative one. It's the glue that brings it all together and makes all the processes work. And the stewards is the oversight one. It's like the judicial, it's the one that looks over it to make sure it's completely safe. But the key element here is they do all work together. It is a team. This model works all the way from the smallest event you can think of, all the way up to the largest event you can think of. An F1 Grand Prix will have this same model at play. There might be more people involved, but the model actually applies throughout the piece. Next slide, please.
So we're moving on to clerk of the course. So we've figured out that we've got our stewards, our clerks, and our event secretary. So the clerking aspect is something I'm familiar with. This is something that I do out on events, but I know Brian's very familiar with it as well when he's been out across events all across the country. To summarize, is basically the role that's responsible for organising and running the competition by pretty much full involvement from day naught. There's a large amount of teamwork and also a large amount of delegation. Not one person is responsible for everything on a motorsport event. Whilst the clerk has that operational side, actually a big part of their role is to realise which roles and what tasks can be delegated to an appropriate person rather than taking that responsibility all themselves. We're going to split a lot of these roles up into three different sections as well. So we're firstly going to talk about what a clerk does before an event. Firstly, they're basically ensuring that they have their team of officials with them ready to run the event, and also to make sure that they're comfortable with their team of people working with them, because, and there's no disguising it, sometimes things can become quite difficult on motorsport events. You have to make decisions very quickly. Tensions can be quite high. So you have to be satisfied that the people you are going to have with you, you're going to be able to work with them as a team collaboratively, and also know that you can rely on them to make a decision for you and reach the same conclusion most of the time. Another big part of the role of the clerk is actually to make sure that the venue and the facilities that you're going to be using for the event are actually safe. They're compliant with the regulations. So back before, when I mentioned about the yearbook, there's regulations within that which venues have to adhere to for certain types of events. There's also things called track licenses as well. It's basically an additional document which, if you're at a fixed venue, so if you're at a big race circuit or a hill climb, there are extra regulations on there which the clerk has to make sure they're satisfied that basically they're compliant, they're running with what's being given to them. But they're also very important in making all of the plans prior to the meeting themselves, and that's in conjunction with the secretary. So we'll touch on that a bit later on. But this can be ranged from anything from the time schedule, so exactly when and what is running at what time. It also includes all the safety aspects as well. Safety is absolutely paramount, and it's pretty much the clerk that takes on that overall responsibility to make sure that the event is safe and compliant. But there's also other things such as incident plans. So things do go wrong, and it can go wrong fairly quickly on a motorsport event. There's nothing slow about motorsport usually. So what clerks and what the organising teams will do is also create plans to deal with incidents on the day should something go wrong, so that rather than making it up on the spot, if something does go wrong, they are in their heads, they know roughly what kind of procedure they have to follow to make sure that everyone is okay and it's dealt with effectively. So having done all of that, and we move on to the event day itself, pretty much the clerk is there just to make sure the event is running safely and fairly. It can be absolutely chaotic sometimes, depending on what kind of event it is. You could be at a large, for context in what I do, it could be a large British Hill Climb Championship meeting. So there could be 200 competitors, and it could be the end of season finale, and it is all very high stakes. But sometimes it's the same for an auto solo happening, or an auto test or sporting trial. As I mentioned, those plans, particularly around the incident and safety, are put into place. That's the practical aspect of it. So whilst before the meeting, it's very much the planning stage, it's then turning those plans into actions on the day should something go wrong, but make sure that they're done efficiently and effectively. Another large role of the clerk is to make sure that the actual competition itself is fair. So they are usually the first point, what we call the first level of judicial process, the first judicial level. So anyone that feel like the sport isn't as fair as it could be, something has gone wrong where they feel like they've been penalised incorrectly, or they have breached the track limit, anything of that nature, the clerk will be the first person to deal with that. And then it'll be the stewards later on which build on that process, and we'll move on to that with Brian very shortly. After the event, the clerk is very much there to just finalise the results. So what you'll have is someone called a timekeeper or a chief timekeeper. They will produce the results from their timing system or their result system, and they'll give that to the clerk, and the clerk will make sure that they are as they should be. They will approve them. And then what they'll also do is make sure that any other judicial matters or incident matters that have happened from the meeting are completed and finalised. Basically, make sure everyone is happy, everyone goes home with a smile on their face, and anything outstanding from the meeting is completed. That's pretty much it summed up. It's an awful lot of work, but actually it is very rewarding. It's very enjoyable. It's very suited to those people that like to make quick decisions, are very organized, and can actually lead a team. As I said, not one person is responsible for everything. And you find actually as the permit level increases, so the bigger events you go to, the more people you have with you running these events. The clerk is very much the one to delegate some of those responsibilities to those other people to make sure the event is running smoothly. What tends to happen is if you have someone that takes on all the work themselves, it isn't quite as smooth as it could be. Someone that would make a good clerk is someone that has an experience in running events. Now, this again doesn't have to be that you're there running it entirely yourself, but you can be there at least observing or watching or shadowing someone that is doing it, and you can pick up the skills and the knowledge that they have. And also a sound knowledge of the regulations. So the clerk is there to make sure the sport is compliant, and a large part of that is understanding the regulations which the sport is adhering to. So having that knowledge, that foundation of the discipline you're working in as well, is very important. So to put it into context in terms of regulations, whilst we have the Motorsport UK yearbook, which is what the whole sport complies with, all of individual events have their own separate regulations called supplementary regulations. And they are, as the name would suggest, supplementary to the rules that are in the yearbook. So whilst you have those rules in the yearbook, the clerk is also making sure the event is running to the supplementary regulations, and it's a crossover of both. So long as the event is running safely and within both sets of regulations, the clerk knows that they've basically done a good job on the day. A large part of the regulations as well is when things do go wrong. So as I said, the clerks are the first judicial body. The second judicial body is what we call stewards, and Brian's going to talk about that right now.
Okay, so if we think about that sort of operational role that Sam's just described, that's all about making the event happen on the day. The steward's role is that oversight role, working as part of the team along with the clerks to cross-check that everything is actually going on. And it's almost a neutral view on some of the kind of decisions, and it's very much that team coming from the other side of it. So stewards will work as a panel or individually. There'll always be an odd number. And what you will see is that at bigger events, there will tend to be a panel. At smaller events, there will be only one steward. It depends on the discipline and the level of the event. The difference is that where it's a bigger event with a panel, you will have one of the stewards, he's a Motorsport UK steward, in that they're representing Motorsport UK at that event, and they're appointed by the governing body. The other two stewards are in fact appointed by the organising club, and they come together as a team. What is significant to remember there is that it is a majority decision. So within that team, if the two event stewards decide that it's one answer and the Motorsport UK steward has a different perspective, they'll obviously talk about it, argue it through, come to a conclusion, but it will be a majority. And it doesn't always mean the Motorsport UK steward's view is the one that runs the event or the decision. So that's what the kind of background to the stewarding position is. If we look at what they actually are looking at, they're looking at three principal aspects. The primary one, and I believe it's the one that sort of trumps everything else, is the safety. That their main responsibility is to ensure that the event is being run safely. The second one is fairness. You know, it's making sure that all the competitors and all the people at the event itself are getting the right sort of approach from the event organisers, and it is a fair event in that sense. And that relies on having the regulations and the reporting processes in place, which will actually ensure the fairness. It will then make sure that the safety plans are in place and the event will run smoothly. So if we take all those three things now and take a little bit more detailed look at them, safety, kind of the way that this is executed, it's all about making sure that the steward working with the clerk is confident that everything to do with the event is safe. Now, that's not simply just the track or the route. That's a key part to it. It's to make sure it meets with the plans. There's nothing that's unsafe about it. You know, there are no obstacles in the way that are going to cause issues. But it's also that all the resources are in place. There's the right number of marshals and officials. There's the correct support resources that can be rescue, recovery, marshalling in its various forms, and all the other things that actually make sure that everything's ready to actually make sure that this event's safe. And lastly, it's that there's a good plan. So it's the three elements. It's the where, you know, the track or route is safe. It's the what, which is the resources that are going to make it work. And it's the planning, which is the process to bring all those together. So it's actually the task of the stewards is to kind of inspect that, make sure it's all in place and work with the clerk to ensure that the event can go ahead. So key point there is that the steward's role is in fact deemed to be the most senior role on the event, because they have the right, if they deem the event to be unsafe in any way, they could withdraw the permit. Now, this is the permit that Motorsport UK has issued, which is the authorization for the event to go ahead. If that permit is withdrawn, the event cannot go ahead. It will be uninsured and it would be totally unacceptable to continue. So it is a fairly significant responsibility that comes with the role. Second area is that aspect of fairness. And it's all about confirming the event is being run in a fair and equitable way. One of the aspects of that, if you recall, Sam talked about the first judicial level being the clerks and the clerking team. So what that's really saying is if there's any issues that people have, and those people can be competitors or whoever, they will hopefully be sorted out by working with the clerking team and reaching the right decisions. If in fact the competitor or whoever is unhappy with that decision, they can actually raise it another level to the stewards. And the stewards will then look at the situation, reach their own conclusions, and can actually change that initial decision if appropriate, or they can uphold it. So that's the kind of the context to make sure the event's being run fairly. And the third area is the regulatory reporting area. So this is really that saying that the regulations that Sam talked about, being the general ones that are in the yearbook, and those that are written specifically, the supplementary regulation of the event, will describe and define what the event is. So the task is to make sure that the event that's been run on the day is the same event that was described in those regulations. So it's cross-checking that. It's making sure that all the administrative processes are in place, checking permits and licenses, etc. Now, that may seem a little bit sort of bureaucratic and nitpicking, but the importance of that is if any of these are not correctly in place, it may leave the event running badly, or more significantly in some ways, it may leave the event uninsured and liable to kind of sort of sanctions from outside. So it's very important that all the admin process and the right sort of bureaucracy is in place to make sure we've got kind of the right event. Another aspect of the task is to provide reports. Now, some of them are sort of normal standard reports that go back to Motorsport UK that will describe the event, to describe any incidents, anything that really needs mentioning, any things that might need attention in the future, or anything that was particularly good. So if there are any officials that are particularly meritorious, then they can be mentioned, so that can be recognised moving forward. If incidents happen, part of the process is to provide reports about those incidents, because that's what Motorsport UK will use to actually see if any action is needed. Now, that may not be sort of penalty type action, it might be improvement type action or changes to regulations. It feeds that whole process of knowledge. So that's what the regulatory reporting side is all about. So if we now think about who makes a good steward, there are some key attributes that kind of are better than others. One is impartiality, because of the fairness aspect, and also the working with the clerk. It's important that you're relatively neutral in how you view it. You shouldn't have too many personal opinions bring with it. You should bring a logical approach so you can look at things. Common sense and pragmatism. I think what we find is everything that happens at events, it's always new and it's always unique. So you have to apply the rules in a sort of practical way. And as long as you're working within the rules, there is some rule, the framework of the rules, there are some opportunities to kind of interpret differently. So you need to actually think about these in a common sense and pragmatic way. But the steward can bring that sort of skill or that kind of context to the questions. If you're going to understand what's going on, obviously it's much better if you know what the events are all about. And so having a sound working knowledge of the regulations, both for the event and the Motorsport UK general regulations, is obviously important, because that will actually help you make the right decisions and sort of assess, what's going on. Local knowledge can be very significant because certain things will be appropriate in certain areas. And it might be that what works in one place will not work at a different venue. So as long as it's working within the regulation framework, it might be okay to do things in subtly different ways. And that's where having good event stewards and Motorsport UK stewards as a team is important, because you can actually make sort of sure that you've got all the attributes within the team, because it is part of the team. So not only have you got the stewarding team, but you've got the fact that stewards are a significant part of the main event team. So that ability to work with others is also a key attribute. So next one.
And I guess I would say the most important member of that team, so take the clerks and stewards aside, and I'm sure Brian would agree with me, are the event secretaries. I think they're kind of an underrepresented group in most cases, but actually the role that they carry out on events is absolutely critical to making the event happen in the first place. So whilst the clerks and stewards perhaps make the decisions, they go out and they do things, they steer the direction the event is going in, it's actually the secretary which provides all that administrative support and the practical elements of those decisions to actually put them in place. The Blue Book definition or the Yearbook definition is actually on the screen in italics. It says the secretary of the meeting is responsible for the organisation of the meeting in terms of all materials and notices required. So when I said before, your clerk is working with the plans, making things happen before the event, it's the secretary which is working with the clerk then to put those things on paper, to make them basically distributable across all the competitors. They issue all of those things, they email, they organise all of the team meetings that all the officials are having together before the event itself. There's a lot of procedures as well in terms of clerical procedures, in terms of applying for permits, putting together entry lists, entry forms, even just advertising the event itself. The secretary will probably have a large part to do with that. As I said, the administration side is actually the key aspect here in terms of their job itself. As I said, organising meetings with the officials, it could be with the club. There might actually be several secretaries responsible within the club as well. Sometimes we find that this role is split out somewhat. So you have your secretary on the event itself, which is what we call the event secretary, but you might also have something called an entry secretary, and they're also responsible for, as the name would suggest, receiving the entries from competitors. In that case, it could be hundreds, if not thousands, of paid entries coming in for the events that the club is organising throughout the year. A large part of their work as well is around the supplementary regulations. So this is what I mentioned earlier with the clerk. So the clerk has to adhere with these supplementary regulations on the event. the clerk works heavily with the secretary to put those regulations together before the event takes place. And as I said, the management of entries is one of the largest aspects, and probably one of the most time consuming if that was if you are running something rather large. But again, it's a very satisfying job to undertake if you are given that position of responsibility. When they're actually on the day, they are very much overseeing and guiding the administration on the day itself. So as I said, your clerks and your stewards could be there, they could be making decisions left, right and centre and steering the event in one direction or another. But the secretaries are the ones that are actually putting those decisions into practice and making those decisions known to the whole paddock, the whole of the event basically. So what we have at most events is an official notice board. Now, some events have this as like a digital platform, but some events, the events I'm at, this is actually a physical notice board within the paddock. And what the secretary will do is issue something called bulletins. And these are basically notices for anything which has happened on the event, which the clerk wants the competitors to be made aware of. So where we've had, for instance, a judicial scenario, so the clerk has made a decision to issue a penalty to a competitor, that is noted on the bulletin and published. Basically, then it's public information. And that then allows due process to follow within the judicial process that the stewards and clerks carry out if they need to. It also serves as the platform for the publication of results and all the times as well that happen at an event. So whilst the clerk, as I said, oversees and makes sure the results are correct, the secretary will then make those public. They will publish them. They could even email them out to all the competitors if they need to. Now, the reporting aspect of the steward that Brian has spoken about. So Motorsport UK stewards have to submit a report to Motorsport UK in most circumstances on the event itself, but it's actually the secretaries that pull all that information together. So where we have all of these officials at events, so you have your clerks, your stewards, but you also have medical people, you have your rescue and recovery. They may have various pieces of paperwork which need to come to the secretary, and they collate that information and then pass it to the stewards to then send back to Motorsport UK. And probably most importantly, the secretaries are the first point of contact for pretty much anyone on the event. Now that's either before or during or after the event itself. And in terms of the judicial process, if something has gone wrong, they can actually be the first person the competitor goes up to. So whilst the clerks can deal with those situations initially, most of the time it's the secretaries that receive that protest. So if we think in a Formula One context, whilst it comes across on the TV screen that the stewards have made a decision on Fernando Alonso, for instance, actually there's been a secretary involved from the very beginning to receive that initial protest from a team or from a competitor, and they pass that information on to the relevant person to make that decision. After the event, they basically make sure that all outstanding paperwork, any administration or basically any paperwork is completed so that it can be sent to the steward, and also for the club's own records. So there's a lot of paperwork that the club needs themselves to make sure everything is closed, finalised, and again, everyone has gone home with a smile on their face. When the results are basically checked by the clerk of the course and the clerk is happy, again, they will publish those results either on the notice board, usually now by email, and also make sure they're available on the website from the club. If sometimes there's been damage to property on the land itself, they will also be the person who makes that communication with the landowner to settle what the fee will be, essentially, if there's a fence broken. Things like that happen all the time, particularly if you're on a big stage rally somewhere. There's all of that communication that the secretary undergoes as well afterwards. And when every competitor competes in an event under Motorsport UK jurisdiction, we have something known as a per capita fee. And that's basically the insurance fee, and that's actually covered by the competitor when they enter the meeting. What the secretary does is submits a report back to Motorsport UK with the number of competitors that have entered that event. And then what that allows Motorsport UK do is to bill the club for the insurance fee to make sure everyone's basically been covered at the very end of the day, at the end of the day. So having listened to all of that, what makes a really good event secretary? Now, someone with strong organizational or procedural skills will absolutely excel in this role. You don't necessarily need a verbatim knowledge of the rules or Motorsport UK or motorsport in general, but if you are very procedural orientated, you like the secretarial jobs, you might be a secretary in your professional life, this is an absolutely brilliant opportunity for you to undertake. They have to be organised. By nature of the role, there is a lot of cogs turning to make an event happen, and they are very much the glue that holds the meeting together, and they serve as that conduit for information when the event's happening, and basically send out the tasks to all the appropriate people. As I said, you don't necessarily have to have that knowledge, that in-depth knowledge that perhaps a clerk or steward would have, but an important skill set for a secretary to have is the ability to know where to look for that information. They may not have the answer there and then, but they might know where to look to find that answer. If they don't know where to look to find the answer, having that ability and the confidence to ask someone for help is also very important in this role. Usually it will be the clerk of the course that will work with the secretary to make sure everything is covered in that respect. When I mentioned the fact that they're also the first point of contact, you've got to be a people person, because you could be dealing with an awful lot of people on a day, even beforehand and even afterwards. So having that ability to reassure and motivate the team around you, and also to actually give some support to the volunteers at meetings. Sometimes it can be a rainy day in the middle of a countryside meadow somewhere, you'll be doing a production car trial. It can be wet and windy. The secretary is usually the one to lift the spirits up, to really bring the team together and to make everyone happy and let the event continue safely and smoothly. But another important aspect here, and this actually applies to the clerks and the stewards and any other role within motorsport, is that ability to mentor and support those people that are perhaps interested in wanting to take this role on in the future. You tend to find, and I know at events I'm at, that the secretary will often have a deputy or an assistant with them. They may not be someone that will be in a position to take the role over just yet, but the secretary is happy to have them by their side so they can actually learn what the secretary is doing and at some point eventually take over in the future. But again, that's the same for all other roles as well. We're very much keen to get people shadowing clerks, shadowing stewards, any other role, to at least get that basic understanding, because, and I think as a famous French wartime politician said, that graveyards are filled with men full of indispensable people. So no one person will ever be responsible for something forever. We're always going to need more people coming into this sport. So it's very important that everyone in a position of responsibility has the ability to mentor and support that next generation. I'll just finish the event secretary spiel by just saying that it is pretty much the most critical role at a motorsport event to make sure it runs smoothly and effectively. As I said, they are that glue that binds the team together. They are that conduit of information between not only the clerk and the stewards, but all other officials and marshals at an event. So it's highly critical that they are in place to make sure the event is running, it's smooth, and basically everyone has a good time.
Thanks, Sam. I think up to now we've been talking about the, shall we call it the core team, but those three roles that make up the centre of the event organising team. But as I commented earlier, there are lots of other people that have to be part of that team to make it work and make the event actually happen. And this is another key area, which is, shall we call it, the technical officials. These really split into two main groups. There's what the scrutineers. These are the people that actually ensure that the cars are safe. It's their first responsibility. They'll inspect the vehicles, they'll make sure they're safe. In some cases, it's common sense safety. In many cases, it's make sure that they reach the required levels that are described in the general regulations in the yearbook, where certain aspects are specified. If you're running in, for example, a discipline that you have to have a roll cage in the vehicle, there are rules about what that roll cage is and how it's attached. The scrutineers have to understand what that's about, and they will inspect to make sure it complies, to make sure it's safe. Another subdivision of that is eligibility. So as well as safety, it's the question of, does this vehicle really meet the requirements for how it's being entered? Most events will have different classes. So there will actually be rules about what sort of aspects it has, what details it has on the car. And the scrutineering body, these are the people that come along and can check that to make sure that it's abiding by those rules, and therefore it's competing fairly. So it's not sort of putting bits in that are against the rules for that class. And so it does meet the eligibility requirements. So it looks like a fairly simple task, but it's anything but. because you're dealing with quite a complexity of sort of technical areas. So it is an interesting area for anyone that likes that kind of context of the technology of the cars. The second area of the technical piece, the environmental scrutiny, it's a slightly strange name because its primary purpose is to ensure that vehicles are abiding by noise regulations. I think we're probably all conscious that these days noise is a major issue in society. So most events do actually have requirements for keeping noise down to a level. So there's a maximum noise level. These people are the people that actually will check that to make sure that the event is actually not contradicting some requirements in its location. And that might put the venue at danger. So it's another key role. So that's kind of the technical area. As I say, it looks simple, but it is an area with a lot of interest that sits behind it. Next slide.
And then the next ones are really what we would call the support roles. And we say support because we actually, if we've had a good day's motorsport, won't need these people. This is mainly for when something has gone wrong. So a car has gone off or it's broken down. So first of all, we have our recovery personnel. So as it would suggest, they're the ones that go out and recover stricken vehicles. This could be anything from a Land Rover with a winch, with a trailer. It could be a full flatbed lorry with a high-ab crane. Again, these are absolutely pivotal people because sometimes, let's say at a race meeting, we have very strict time schedules to basically get the next race out, the next grid out onto their session. So these people are very effective. They will go out, they will recover the vehicle and bring it back within sometimes a matter of minutes. Again, they're also highly important for stage rallying as well. If someone has gone off on a stage, they'll be the ones there to go and retrieve the car. We also have what are known as rescue personnel. Now, I consider these a bit of a hybrid between paramedics and firemen or firewomen. They're trained and equipped basically to manage incidents and provide that initial medical support. So not only are they trained to give that first aid response and basically do something called C-spine, they can also go in and cut cars up. So they have hydraulic cutting gear. They also have stretchers, what we call KEDs, extrication devices. There's a whole plethora of equipment that they carry on that unit. As I said, it's a bit of a mix between the both. And the training that they're given is actually very intense. And we'll talk more about the training later on. But to put it into context, Motorsport UK sent a team of rescue personnel. It was with the BARC, it was one of their teams, to a competition against fire services from all of the constituencies around the UK. And we were actually nowhere near the bottom in terms of competency in this competition. I think we came something like 17th out of 30th in terms of our skills, the rescue people's skills to cut people out of cars to make sure they're stable and then transferred into an ambulance. It's a whole massive piece around that safety aspect, and they are very highly trained people, but they're all volunteers and they do it in their free time. And there's no reason why you couldn't do it either. So it's something to consider. In terms of the training, so a lot of these roles, with the exception of the secretary, have what's called a modular training booklet. And this is something that you can apply for through Motorsport UK. This is absolutely of no cost to you. The only requirement that we have of you is to go out and get the experience and complete this booklet. It's actually very similar to an NVQ qualification booklet in the way it's structured. So we have various pages and they all focus on different competency areas that we want you to achieve to be able to carry out your role fully in the future. So for instance, in the clerking section, you have elements of safety. So there's lots of safety aspects you need to learn about and understand. You also have the whole judicial side and the whole event organization side. And these things change depending on what the role is you're undertaking. So as I said, with the rescue people, there's a large practical element in their training in terms of practicing how to cut cars up, how to do it safely, and how to safely stabilize someone if they need to be taken out of a stricken car. These books are checked regularly as well. So Motorsport UK, we issue them to you, but we'll also give you a mentor for the vast majority of these roles. So this isn't a process you undergo yourself. This is something that you do with someone experienced with you. They may not be at the event with you, but what they are is a point of contact for you. So you can ring them and ask them questions. They'll also contact you and provide you with that support where you need it, and also give that extra bit of knowledge because, as Brian has said, nothing is nothing is predictable and everything is unique. All the situations in motorsport are unique. What you can do is learn from previous situations and adapt that skill set or the knowledge or the answers to the problems, as it were, to the situation that you have at your event. Again, those mentors are a very key point of contact for you in that training process. What we also have in terms of learning and development are what we call the sort of the online aspect of it. So it's a bit like what we're doing tonight. So first of all, Motorsport UK or other clubs will organise webinars like we are now to provide that initial training. We also have something called the Learning Hub. So on there are online modules, essentially, which we ask that all of our marshals and officials undertake. So there's everything from first aid, CPR. There's modules in there about judicial and safety. There's an enormous amount on there. And basically, it's something you can do in your own time to support you in the development in the roles you want to undertake. But it also serves as a platform for you to look at perhaps what another role does, and you can learn about that role before you then actually go out and do it yourself, if you so wish. There's also on there a lot of soft skills modules. So as we mentioned, this is all about working as a team. And sometimes teams don't work together perhaps as well as they could do. So on there, we have modules which focus on the soft skills aspects, so how to deal with difficult conversations, for instance. It's a very useful resource, and I encourage you all to have a look at it. If you want to go on there and have a look, you can log in. If you are a license holder already, it's just your license number. And if you have a password, it will be whatever password you've set up before. But if you're completely new, you can register for a login for free, and you can access this literally in a matter of minutes. But of course, we've spoken about the on-event roles. There's actually a whole other aspect in terms of club roles, which Brian is going to talk you through very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I think as Sam has just said, that we concentrate on event roles up to now, but in reality, if we don't have clubs, we're going to have events. So it's how do we make the clubs work? It is as significant, and there's another whole raft of opportunities to get engaged with the club roles, and often with getting involved in the club roles means you will also become involved with events as well. They kind of go hand in hand. So next slide, please. So what are those roles? I mean, I didn't list them out here. I just put them in a list of some of the major ones. And these are all absolutely crucial to making the club work effectively. You know, there's a committee, the people that kind of take the tactical decisions to make it all happen. The club secretary, the treasurer, the social, because clubs are as much about people coming together and working together and enjoying working together as they are about putting on competitive events. So social stuff is important. Development, training, mentoring, they're all key areas that make a club work. And without that, it won't be a successful club. And if it's not a successful club, it won't put on really good events. So these are as key. And I think the other thing it does, it opens up to a whole different list of skills and interests and other things that people might like to contribute to the kind of to motorsport in that way. So it is as critical as the event roles that we talked about. Pulled out another couple of specific ones, because I think we also have to accept that a sport, our sport, along with other sports, actually work in the community and exist in the community. So we have to work along with the requirements that come from there. I think safeguarding is a key one we'd all recognise. It's critical that we look after young people and people that are at risk. So the way we operate is key. So it's important that we have people that take an interest from that perspective and make sure we're not doing things that will contradict that. Sustainability, I mean, that is coming into our lives in more and more ways than we maybe want, if that's the way of looking at it. But it's all about sort of safeguarding the future and working into the future. So having people that can contribute into the clubs in what are the best practices and how that could be adopted will kind of safeguard the future, both in the bigger picture and also for motorsport itself. Hugh Chambers, the CEO of Motorsport UK at a session the other week, actually was saying that he felt that this was so critical to actually maintain the future of motorsport. Motorsport does have a future, but it will need to match the requirements of the community around it and change and evolve. The shift progressively into things like EV vehicles or alternative fuels is a part of that. So I think having that expertise within the club, within the team, it is critical to go forward with. So next slide. So we spend a lot of time and we bombard you with a whole raft of different roles and possibilities, which I think most of us find confusing anyway, but seeing it for the first time might be confusing. So I think what we need to do is find a way of getting the possibility of asking questions of the experts within the club. We've got a few of those on the call now, and hopefully they can contribute if there's any questions right at the end. But at this point, here's a couple of some hopeful, helpful addresses that you can actually send questions in. There might be detailed questions, or there might even be a, so what do I do next question? The general queries one, it is covering everything. One thing that we haven't specifically mentioned, but is a key initiative that Motorsport UK are running at the moment, is an initiative called Streetcar. And what it's all about is trying to sort of grow awareness of all the opportunities for to get involved in motorsport, including competing, using your normal road car, the one that you do the shopping with, your street car in effect. So if there's any potential or aspects of that area, kind of send a query into this address. And what will happen is one of our experts will pick this up, and if they can't answer it, they'll direct it to the right person to answer it. So moving on.
And then on the flip side of the coin, whilst we encourage you to approach your club as the primary point of contact if you're interested in getting involved in one of these roles or anything in motorsport in that instance, what we then would ask you to do is to then approach Motorsport UK in terms of applying for your initial license or registration. First of all, as I mentioned, you can create a login with the Learning Hub to at least get that initial sense of training in the learning practices. But then you can go on our resource center on our website, and on there you'll find the application forms. So some of them will require a nomination from a club. So if you want to be a clerk of the course, you'll need to get hold of someone like Brian or Dan to endorse your application to make sure that we're happy that we can give you that trainee license to begin with. Some of them you don't. So for scrutineers, if you want to be a scrutineer, it's simply the case of actually just filling out the form and sending it in to us. Once we have that from you, we can then provide you with that training booklet that I spoke about earlier, and then provide you with that support as you go through your training process. But most importantly, and I think we'd all agree, the main thing for you to do is actually go out and volunteer, go out and get the experience and go and experience things. I think a lot of this may seem daunting to begin with, but actually going outside your comfort zone could be one of the most rewarding things you do. And the opportunities volunteering gives you in the sport takes you a long, long way. So to put it into context for me, so I started volunteering when I was 13 and I had no intentions of working in motorsport full time. And it's only through the things that I did through motorsport that actually made my hobby into a job. And that happens for a lot of people. The world of motorsport is also very small. So whilst we may think the Formula One or the big international events are very distant from what people do at club level, actually you find a lot of the people running the club level events also have involvement with the large events as well. So there's no reason why if you start doing Autosolos, you can't then go and do something else later on. Obviously, find something that you enjoy doing and by all means stick with it. But you also have the opportunity to go out and explore and make contacts, and also most importantly, make friends through this as well. A large part of it is working as a team, but also the team you're working with are some of the closest friends you could probably make in life anyway. So that's something to bear in mind as well. And obviously, as Brian said, with the social aspect, a large part of the club thing is, again, if you're going out to the pub and things like that. So there's that whole other side, which you can enjoy out of volunteering.
So hopefully we've kind of explained there are a whole multitude of ways to get involved and kind of the opportunities to do that. But that's all well and good if there aren't any events. So what we have here is a list of the events that are in this region alone throughout April. So you can actually see there's an awful lot going on. To put it in context in the bigger picture, I think if I've got this right, in terms of permits issued, Motorsport UK issues something like 6,500 permits a year, which means there's 6,500 events goes on nationally throughout the year. So there's a lot of events going on. The trick is finding the ones you're interested in, the ones that are close enough for you to go along to. So this is the list of the events that we have in what we call Motorsport Month. It highlights the events for the particular month of April, but I think what is true is it's not because these are events specially put on for this month. This is just picking up this month. Some of the training aspects that kind of these Take Part Tuesday sessions are specific to April, but the events themselves aren't. So that's here as a kind of list of all the events that we're looking at. So next, at this point, it's really time for any questions. We've bombarded you with a whole lot of thoughts, and really we're now at the point, I think, where has anybody got any queries and questions? And because we are a kind of relatively small group, I'd open this up to A, questions, and B, sort of any of the people that are actually here or kind of on the call to answer them as appropriate. I think in particular, if I've got this and understood it correctly, we have got somebody that's potentially interested in the recovery area. And I know one of the attendees here is actually a licensed recovery operative. So maybe there's an opportunity. So at this point, I'll just open it up for general questions. But as I say, just to make it try a little bit more orderly, if you can either use a virtual or a real hand, if you have a question, that might make it easier to operate. Any questions? Is everybody dumbfounded, overcome, overwhelmed, whatever the right word is? Laura?
Yeah, thanks, Brian and Sam. I think this has been really useful. And we've had a little snippet sort of towards the end, Sam, with you talking about the benefits it's had to your personal life. I just wondered whether you guys might be able to talk a little bit more about how volunteering is rewarding and what you get out of it personally as well. So whether that's the skill set, professional development, all of that side of thing would be good to hear.
Do you want me to start, Brian?
Yeah, you come in for your angle first.
So for me personally, it's motorsport has actually opened up all the doors that's ever been opened up for me in my life. And I actually studied marine biology at uni. I did my master's in it, again with no intentions of being in motorsport full time. But all of the skills I learned, particularly as a young person in motorsport, through the volunteering side and being given those positions of responsibility, as it were, really stood out on my CV. And that's the same for a lot of people that go through the volunteering side of the sport. In some cases, you'll have people which are the clerks of the course, which are potentially managing a team of 60 or 100 people on an event. They may not actually be managers in their professional life, but they're essentially doing a very senior management position at an event. So that kind of skill set that you build is very, very transferable in your everyday life. Something that we have done, so when we talk about the rescue and recovery aspects, those people, we are introducing something called FREC 3 and FREC 4. So those are actually externally certified qualifications that we are going to be providing our rescue and recovery personnel. So those are real life qualifications which they will achieve. And it's the same kind of qualifications that real life emergency responders will have. But this is something we're also going to broaden in the future as well, in terms of other aspects. So with like clerk of the course, for instance, we are looking at how we potentially get an event management and organisation qualification, a real life qualification, provided having the clerk complete their training. As I said, the skills and the logbooks are actually MVQ style qualification books. So they're almost 99% there in terms of them being a real life qualification. So the fact you've gone through and completed one of those to become a fully licensed official is a very rewarding, but also very quite important document, because it shows that you have that ability to go out, to learn, to ask the questions, but also adapt. Improvise, adapt, overcome is my favorite saying when I'm out clerking on events. And yeah, it's absolutely invaluable. And I guess I would say the most important thing above all is that friendship aspect. So the people you're out working on events with and you meet in motorsport will become some of your best friends as well. So not only will you get that full developmental side in terms of your personal life, but you also meet people that you can have a great time with, and you can stay in touch with and go out and do fun things, go to the pub with your club or whatever. So it's absolutely invaluable.
Maybe if I just have my perspective there, I'll start with just totally echoing Sam's last point. You know, through kind of my involvement in motorsport, I've come across some really great people. It's been really good to work with, and have become extremely good friends. It does become a huge community. I think apart from that, and maybe an example of that is, you know, when we had the COVID months, years, whatever you want to call it, I don't think I realized at the time how much I'd missed not working with these people and meeting at events, etc. So when it was lifted, the restrictions were lifted, it was fantastic to get alongside these people. I think the other aspect is it's not a career aspect, but it's enabled me to get to places and involved in things I would never have got any other way. So, for example, I'll be at a British Championship meeting this coming weekend, officiating at that. I would not have been able to do that if I'd not got involved and kind of, work my way through. So I think it opens up huge opportunities to do things you're interested in and kind of get more out of life, if that's the way of expressing it, as well as the people side of it. Anyone else want to contribute to that thought? If not, Ben, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, it was just really just to sort of chip in. Some of you on the call sort of know me and recognise me. I've been around in motorsport since I basically come of age at like 12 years old, started doing my first 12 car. And throughout all of those years, sort of my role within motorsport has evolved and changed. Sort of started competing at real low level club side and then got involved with officiating, marshalling. I'm now licensed official recovery rescue. I've done clerking. I've been involved with timekeeping, radio. But I think a big part of it is actually getting close to the motorsport. And motorsport has been a huge part of my life. My parents win it, lots of my family, and actually being able to get really close and involved with the inner workings of motorsport and being out there marshalling like right next to the track, that's been phenomenal. But also the places that you get access to, like Brian said, he's going to sort of some national meetings. You get not quite exposure, but you get access to some amazing places. Brands Hatch. I've been lucky enough to marshal, set up, officiate at Brands Hatch for some of the stage rallies, and being able to walk up like druids. That's kind of things like that you never get to experience out in the wilderness unless you're actually really heavily involved. Being out in some of the Welsh forests, some stunning scenery that you'd never be able to see or experience. And then you couple that being involved with motorsport as well. It's absolutely fantastic. So being out there, it's just such a rewarding experience, and being able to sort of live that every other weekend. I just thought that was kind of worth mentioning about being able to get those experiences.
I think sometimes the way I think of it, when I was growing up and my dad was competing and I used to spectate mainly, and ever since I got involved in the volunteering side, I never saw the sport the same way again, but only for the right reasons. It only gave you more incentive to go out and do more things. And as you said, like the pool of people around the country, okay, there's 10,000 marshals and 5,000 licensed officials, but somehow everyone seems to know each other, and somehow or another you can end up going to an event that you only could have thought was, so far a reach, it was impossible to get to. It's actually completely the opposite. The sport is somewhat quite small in that sense, and people do go around to different events. People will go and get invited to go and do things which they never thought they could do. So it's really, really worth getting involved in that respect.
Just to bring 2 points in, one Ben already touched, which is quite interesting, is a lot of people that marshal or organize events or officiate, they are also competitors. So they might compete in different sort of events, and then events that they don't, they help out somehow and they get the experience from both sides. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning, I'm in the motorsport trade, and it helped massively on my career being able to say that I'm involved somehow in motorsport. So if you've got a young kids that maybe is willing to pursue a career in motorsport, it is really good that they can get involved as early as possible, or even yourself get involved as early as possible, and show that you volunteered already in the area and you get to know people that will help you out in future. So it's definitely worth, if that's a career, if you've got the career progression side of things in motorsport, it's definitely worth getting involved in marshalling or competing or whatever.
I would just add to that, Vinny, and this is a bit of a project, so you guys are privileged to hear. This is this is not out in the public domain mainly, but a lot of my work at the moment is looking at how we can get under 18s volunteering in the sport. And essentially what the scheme will look like is very similar to the Scouts and Guides in terms of badges and actual qualifications that people under 18 will get. So hopefully in 2024, if any of you do have kids that want to get involved, there will be something next year which will be really quite worthwhile them getting involved in and very rewarding.
Awesome, that's good to know, Sam.
Yeah. We've had a couple of questions in the chat box, Brian.
Yeah, I've just noticed those. So the first question is, once we have our license, how can we attend events? Laura, do you want to start responding to that one?
Yeah, of course. So we're currently in Motorsport Month East. So as soon as firstly, you don't have to wait until you've got your license to attend events. Don't worry about that. Please just come along. So you've seen the calendar that Brian and Sam shared on one of the slides, showing all the events that are happening in April. Again, this isn't atypical. It's sort of like this every month, really, in the region. So I would say if you follow us on our social media at Anglia Motor Club, firstly, you'll be able to see all the events that are coming up, and you were pretty much welcome to attend any of those. So I think if you've got an idea of, firstly, a particular role that you might like to have a watch of, we can partner you up with somebody. So happy to speak more about this later, or shoot us a message and we can pair you up. But also, if you just want to come and have a watch of an event and see how things are going and chat to the people, you're more than welcome to. So have a look at that calendar and do let us know, and we'll look out for you, and we'll be able to buddy you up as well with new people if you like to, so that you can chat to the right people and learn more. But yeah, don't worry, you don't have to wait until you've got your license. You can attend an event from now on. And actually, with the experience we were talking about and the booklet Sam was talking about, you don't necessarily have to wait until you've got that booklet to start getting this experience. You can come along and we'll get you involved as soon as possible.
Laura, can I just ask a question on the back of that? You know, if someone does want to come along to one of these events, what's the best way of making the contact, of knowing how to be there and who to talk to, etc.?
Definitely. So what you can do is you can send us an email using the hello@amsc.org.uk. That will come to myself. So I'm the club development officer at Anglia Motor Sport Club, and I will be able to put you in contact with whether it's specific event organisers or people in that specific role, and I can introduce you to them actually before the event. So we can organise calls, perhaps. You could speak to someone, you could speak to us before you go to the event, so you know what you're going to be going to see. But yeah, if you send us a message, so email, send us a message on social media, we'll pick up on that and we'll point you in the right direction.
Thanks, Laura. I think the only thing I would add to that is just to echo what Laura said. You don't need to wait for your license. You can come along to the event, make the connection, start the journey and gain the experience. And then you can figure out what your interest area is. And if that leads to a licensed role, so be it, then you can get onto that pathway. But kind of get engaged first and figure out what it is you would like.
Yeah.
We've got a second question. Is there a specified amount of time before you're able to work towards a higher level on the pathway? Sam, is that one for you initially?
Yeah, so yes, there is in some respects. There's minimum and maximum times that you can do certain things, and that's not to restrict you in any way, but because the sport is governed by regulations, by nature of that, regulations change. So within certain time periods, we would ask that training is completed. For a clerk of the course, for instance, we ask that that initial bit of training is in no less than 36 months. Or is it no more than 36 months? I think it's no more than 36 months. That's purely because regulations can change. So we don't want you to start your training 15 years ago and then not ever progress forward with it. But what that also does is give you time as well. So in 36 months, there is an awful lot of opportunity to go out there and get some experience. We don't want people, you know, feeling like they have to go and do every single weekend to get that training. That's also why we have the mentor anyway, because they'll be able to see how much extra you might need, or actually if you've gone out, as Brian and Laura said, and gone out and experienced some things before, you may actually pick up things anyway, which you don't have to recover again in your training. Some of it will be more intuitive than other things. So there are some time limits. We have beyond that. So once you're beyond the trainee level, I'll say in the clerking context, you then move to something called a deputy. So for some events, you can actually take charge of the event itself. But then you can move up again, and it's similar to the way the events run. So you have something called a national clerk. So that's one step above, and there will be assessment processes as well there. So it's nothing really to worry about, and you only get assessed on the experience that you build up anyway. As you get more involved, you pick up more things, and actually when you do come to, let's say you have an in-post assessment, actually it's basically just making sure you're there running the event as you normally would do. So they're never really things to worry about. And actually that's why, as I said, you have that mentor. You can also contact us, but you can also contact the club that you've taken your license out through. So for instance, it'd be Anglia here. They can also be a point of contact. Someone like Brian, I consider an absolute mentor figure, particularly for me sometimes. You know, I'll put the world to rights with him every so often and talk about what would you do in this circumstance. So there's lots of people out there you can get experience from and learn from.
I think just to add to that, Sam, I think one of the key things is that there's a lot of training available, but I think sometimes training is the wrong word. What it really is, it's support.
Yeah,
it's mechanisms that help you progress. So I think assessments, yeah, they are assessments, but they're not like exams, if that's it. It's simply to ensure that we're kind of making the right progress in terms of gaining experience and getting to levels of, you know, kind of experience that mean we can move on. So it is very much as much as you want to do and achieve sort of it, but you do get a lot of support in going forward on that. Is anybody else wants to contribute to that? If not, we'll add on to the third question.
I would just add, Brian, as well. So if you do take out that initial license anyway, you then become part of a wider mailing list, and you'll get bulletins from Motorsport UK in terms of, you know, things that are changing within the sport. But what we also organise, and Brian and I have been out delivering them, are things called seminars. So we'll actually get potentially 100 clerk steward scrutineers in a room together and actually provide training as a group in person. And actually they serve mainly for people to network with each other and to learn from each other. There's only so much training we can provide as Motorsport UK, but actually it's the people out there doing the roles which pick up the experience, who are actually dealing with the situations on the day. So learning from other people is the really important aspect. And again, doing that through a club is probably your best port of call there.
Thanks, Sam. The third question we've got here is kind of a little bit specific. It says, I did provide a recovery with a Land Rover many years ago and it appeals again. How do I get back into this locally? Can I direct this at one of our attendees, Ben, on the basis kind of you're in that game, so to speak?
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, when it comes to recovery, if you're talking about Motorsport UK recovery, that is sort of licensed and there is training. And like Sam said, for part of the license application, you actually have to have a letter of recommendation. Not all events require licensed recovery. Events that require licensed recovery are things in my sort of circle with things like stage rallies. They need to be licensed, actually hit a criteria. The vehicle has to be licensed. So it's not just sort of you've got a 4x4 on a tow rope. There are things that need to be sort of checked off. They're assessed. My sort of unit yearly gets inspected by trainers, assessors, just to make sure that I've got all the equipment that's required and it's of a decent standard. Smaller events, say Autosolos, hill climbs and that kind of thing, quite a few of those wouldn't require actual full licensing. If it is something you want to look into, I'm sure if you drop an email to the Hello email address, they can direct that onto me and we can sort of make points of contact and see what sort of thing you're interested in doing or what sort of history or experience you've got.
Thanks,
Hopefully
Ben.
that answers the question.
I guess this shows clearly how the motorsport community works in general, right? Ben is here as an attendee, and we mentioned to him, can you give us a pointer to someone else on how to get involved? And you get this sort of response. People are super willing to help. It's just amazing. Thank you, Ben.
I agree, Vinny. Thanks, Ben. It is a community, isn't it? Particularly at the club level, it is a community.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to end with one kind of thought that kind of springs to mind constantly. I think almost the hardest step with motorsport is getting engaged initially, because it's always hard to see where the door is or the door handle to knock on. Hopefully what we provided in the 2 email addresses and the contacts we've got is a door to knock on to figure out how to come through. Because I think it's probably true to say most people that do never regret it and never come out of it again. It becomes almost an obsession, it's a way of life. But it is hard to find that initial contact. So if you don't come through this way, if you look on the Anglia Motor Sport website or Facebook or wherever, there are contact points there. Use one of those, make contact, and there'll be somebody around to help you out, because that's what we really like to do, to try and encourage more people into our sport.
And I would say there's no club that will turn away volunteers. No club ever has too many volunteers. So there will always be something for you. So do just make that initial contact. Don't be afraid to do it, because there will be something for you, and who knows where it's going to end up. So do just make that contact with the club. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. And you can get engaged. You can start the journey without any experience at all. There'll be people to help you get started.
Yeah.
If there's no other questions, I'd like to take this opportunity to Sam, thank particularly for his contribution, but also everybody else for giving up time this evening. And I hope you found it useful and interesting. And don't forget, there are 3 more of these throughout April. The next one on marshalling being a week this evening. So at that point, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Lovely, thank you.